Good Shabbos. This week's portion, Parshas Chukas, has 5 words which are often overlooked and I think might be able to help us gain some insight into the role of women from the Torah's perspective. All it says is Vatamash Sham Miriam. Miriam died there in the desert of Tzin. Vatikava Sham, and she's buried there. That's all it says about Miriam's death. It doesn't say much else. But the sentence afterwards says, there was no water for the congregation. And then the Jews, of course, gathered against Moshe and complained there's no waters. And we have the famous story of Moshe hitting the rock rather than speaking to the rock. But what I want to focus on is the midrashic understanding of why the water was missing after Miriam's death. And the Medrash says, it's not exactly in the text, but it's somewhat implied that the water that they had in the desert for all those years until her death was in her merit. And they go on to say that in the merit of Moshe, they had the manna falling from heaven. In the merit of Aaron, they had the Shekhinah, they had the divine presence, the cloud of glory, which protected them and helped them in the desert. And in the merit of Miriam, they had a spring which flowed and traveled with them in the desert. So we see that the Torah is giving, according to this midrashic understanding, the Torah gives a lot of weight to Miriam's leadership, not specifically that she was at the front of the people, but that in her merit, there was protection, or water, I should say, for the Jewish people. We also have another interesting section in Parshas Beshalach, way back at the Shira Shabiyam, the song by the sea after the Egyptians are destroyed. The Egyptian army is destroyed in the Red Sea. And there it says that Miriam gathered the women, and with drums and dancing, she sang the Shira, she sang the song. It only says one sentence, but according to many commentaries, it means that she sang the whole Az Yashir, which we say every day during davening. She led the women in a parallel praise of God with song and dance. So it's a very interesting section, because it could have just said the women also praised God, but it shows that Miriam was a leader. It doesn't show that she was a leader of all the people, different than this medrash, which assumes that it's in her merit that we had the well, but it already is alluding to her position of power or position of leadership. We also have a few portions ago in Bahaloscha, where Miriam spoke Lashon Hara, spoke bad against Moshe, her brother, together with Aaron, the other sibling. And it says that she was struck with saras, with leprosy, and Moshe prays for her. He says, Kel na rafanala, please God heal her. But then it says something interesting, that the God says to Moshe she has to go outside of the camp. But the Jews did not travel the whole time that she was outside of the camp. Out of respect, it doesn't say exactly out of respect, but it seems, and it's implied that out of respect for Miriam, they wouldn't travel. So we see again that Miriam has some leadership. And if you go way back to the beginning of the story of Moshe, we know that Miriam is instrumental in the fact that Moshe survived his childhood and was raised in the house of Paro. And because of that, he grew up to be the leader of the Jewish people. Why? Because when Moshe was put in the basket in the Sea of Reeds, it says, his sister, and it's referring to Miriam, stood at a distance. And when the daughter of Paro drew Moshe out of the water, she came and made sure that Moshe was then taken to his mother to be nursed. So we see that Miriam, in a sense, drew Moshe back to the Jewish people. And with that, I'd like to say that we see here some kind of a hint, if not a strong implication, that there is leadership from women in the Torah, but the leadership is of a different sort. Now, when it comes to general leadership, we know that we have Devorah later on, who's a prophetess, who she's called a judge. She's also the leader of the army. So we have here her in a very much more classical form of leadership. We don't have that anywhere in the Torah, but we do see that there's a different form of leadership. And the way I'd explain it very simply is, that Moshe was a sort of a distant figure. Moshe lived on the mountain, on Mount Sinai. Moshe, when he was young, after he was weaned, he lives with the daughter of Paro in the house of Paro. He's completely far, he's distant from the Jewish people. And Miriam, her job was to bring him closer. Her job was to bring Moshe to the Jewish people, to bring him to his mother, to literally be nursed. And therefore, perhaps what it's saying is that there are two forms of leadership. There's the distant figure of Moshe, sort of the transcendent prophet, and then there's the prophet of the people. And that's when Miriam complained against Moshe. She said, why is Moshe different in his choice of marriage at that point? He's saying, who does he think he's different? He should be one of the people. And God says, no, he is different. But it's the type of prophet which might be translated as superior, but the superiority also has a weakness. The weakness is that Moshe now is distant from the people, and we need someone to draw him near. And therefore, perhaps the Medrash is saying this with when it says that the loss of water was because of Miriam. And that might be because water is associated with nature. It's coming up from the ground. It's part of sort of our everyday existence. Moshe, because of his merit, the manna came from heaven. Those are miracles that happen from God, from up on the mountains, from a distance. Those are open miracles. But of course, the traveling spring is also a miracle. But by definition, a spring is coming forth from the ground. Erich Fromm, great psychologist, also said the same thing. He goes back to the very beginning of Bereshis, and he talks about the difference between Adam and Eve. But the basic point is that he says that women's leadership, and in a sense what we call sort of the femininity, is one of nature, is one of being close, is relationships. Whereas the patriarchal societies, which we're kind of used to, especially within Jewish history, is one of domination. And therefore, at the end of the first chapters of Bereshis, after the punishment of eating from the tree of knowledge, it says, V'hu yimshel bachi, the husband, the man, will rule over you. In other words, men rule men control, whereas women are more sort of more, if you want to call it, holistic, or there's more of a natural leadership. And therefore, I personally believe that there's certainly a role for women in leadership. And of course, this has come up recently. It's come up a long time ago in regard to whether women could be rabbis. It's clearly in conservative and reform streams of Judaism, women are allowed to be rabbis. In the Orthodox, it's happening also now to a small degree, and it is somewhat controversial. But I think here we have already a sense that there is a place for women in leadership. Yes, in the Torah, if you read the Torah, you won't see too many women in leadership. Miriam is the only one who's actually hinted to in any form of communal leadership. We see it later with Devorah, but it doesn't mean that it's necessarily totally foreign to the Torah and to the traditional view within Judaism. Good Shabbos.